The stars looked different from the bridge of the Harmony's edge. Ambassador Taman had seen thousands of first contact meetings, but something felt strange about this one. His long purple fingers tapped against the metal chair as he watched the small ship approach their position. "Sir, the human vessel is requesting permission to dock," said his aide, a young Veltharian named Kylus. "They say their captain wants to meet face to face." Taman nodded slowly. The human ship looked simple compared to the massive coalition vessels around it. No bright energy shields, no weapons that glowed with power, just gray metal and basic engines that pushed it through space like an old cargo hauler. "Let them come," Taman said, "but keep our guards ready." Commander Nexus, his military advisor, made a sound of disapproval. The tall warrior's blue skin seemed to darken with worry. "Ambassador, we know nothing about these creatures. They refuse to show their strength. This could be a trap." "Everything could be a trap, old friend," Taman replied. "But the Galaxy Council voted. We meet them properly." The docking bay filled with the usual sounds of a ship connecting to their vessel. Taman walked down to meet their guests, followed by a small group of diplomats and guards. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. 3 humans stepped through. They looked smaller than most species in the coalition. Their skin was pale with hints of brown, and they had strange hair that grew only on the tops of their heads. The one in front wore a simple blue uniform with small metal decorations. "I am Captain Jiho Kim of the Earth Defense Initiative," the human said. His voice was calm and clear. "Thank you for meeting with us." Taman studied the human's face. No signs of fear or aggression, just curiosity and something that might have been hope. "I am Ambassador Taman of the Veltharian Empire. Welcome to Coalition Space, Captain Kim." The formal greetings went well. The humans answered questions about their world, their technology, their people. They seemed honest about everything. Too honest, perhaps. They talked about their wars and mistakes. They explained how they had almost destroyed their own planet before learning to work together. "Your species interests us," Taman said after an hour of talking. "But there is one matter we must address. The strength demonstration." Captain Kim tilted his head slightly. "I'm sorry, Ambassador. Could you explain what that means?" Commander Nexus stepped forward. His hand rested on his weapon. "Every species that joins the coalition must prove their military worth. We fight, you show us your power. We show you ours. Then we know where you belong in the order of things." The 3 humans looked at each other. One of them, a woman the captain had called Dr. Soyoung Park, whispered something in their strange language. Captain Kim nodded and turned back to the coalition representatives. "We appreciate the offer," Captain Kim said carefully, "but we would prefer not to fight." The room became very quiet. Nexus's hand moved closer to his weapon. 2 Talarian guards shifted their weight, ready to act. Even Taman felt surprised. "Captain," Taman said slowly, "I think you misunderstand. This is not optional. Every species must prove their strength. How else can we know if you can defend yourselves? How can we know if you deserve respect?" Captain Kim's expression remained calm. "We understand the tradition, Ambassador, but fighting you would not show you who we are. We would rather learn about you first, understand your ways, find out how we can help each other." "Help each other?" Nexus laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Captain, the galaxy is not a place for helpers. It is a place for the strong. If you cannot fight, you cannot survive." The human captain looked directly at the commander. "With respect, sir, we have survived many things on our world. We learned that fighting is sometimes necessary, but it should never be the first choice." Dr. Park stepped forward slightly. "If we may ask, what happens to species that refuse the strength demonstration?" Taman felt uncomfortable with the answer, but he had to give it. "They are placed in the lowest tier of galactic civilization. They receive basic protection, but no real voice in coalition decisions. They are considered prey species." The 3rd human, who had been introduced as Lieutenant Minho Lee, made a small sound that might have been amusement. "Prey species," he repeated quietly. "Yes," Nexus said firmly. "Species that cannot fight become food for those that can. It is the way of things." Captain Kim nodded as if he understood completely. "I see. And if we agreed to fight you now, what would that prove?" "It would show us your weapons, your tactics, your strength," Nexus explained. "Then we would know how to rank you among the coalition species. But it would also show you our weaknesses," Captain Kim pointed out. "Everything we might use to defend ourselves or our allies. Why would we want to do that with people we just met? The question hung in the air like smoke. Taman realized he had never thought about it that way. For thousands of years, species had eagerly shown their military power to gain status. The idea of hiding strength was alien to him. You refuse, then? Taman asked. We would prefer to earn your trust slowly, Captain Kim said. Through actions, not demonstrations. We understand this might mean starting at the bottom of your system. That is acceptable to us. Nexus shook his head in disbelief. You accept becoming prey species? Just like that? Lieutenant Lee spoke for the first time. Commander, on our world, some of the most dangerous creatures look very harmless. Sometimes the best defense is not looking like a threat. The meeting continued for another hour, but the important decision had been made. The humans would receive provisional membership in the coalition, but at the lowest level. They would be assigned simple duties and basic protection. Most species would consider it an insult. The humans seemed genuinely grateful. As their ship prepared to leave, Taman watched from the observation deck. Dr. Park had given him a small device that contained information about human culture and history. He planned to study it carefully. Sir, Kylus said quietly, do you think they are really as weak as they seem? Taman continued watching the human ship as it moved away. It still looked simple and harmless, but something about the way it moved through space suggested hidden capabilities. Like a dancer pretending to stumble. I think, young Kylus, that we have just met a species that thinks very differently than we do, Taman said. Whether that makes them weak or dangerous, I cannot say. Commander Nexus joined them at the window. They will not last long in the outer sectors, he said. The first raiders that find them will learn the truth quickly enough. Taman nodded, but privately he wondered which raiders would do the learning and which would do the teaching. Something about Captain Kim's calm confidence suggested the humans knew exactly what they were walking into. The human ship disappeared into hyperspace, leaving the coalition fleet alone among the stars. Taman made a note in his report to keep watching the humans closely. Something told him this would not be the last surprise they provided. 3 months had passed since the humans joined the coalition at the lowest level. They had been given simple jobs in the outer sectors, far from important worlds and trade routes. Most coalition members forgot about them quickly. There were always more pressing matters to worry about. Then the long-range sensors picked up the signal that made every species in the galaxy afraid. Devourers. Admiral Kexon whispered the word like a curse. The Talarian commander's scales turned pale gray as he read the reports. They're coming back. The emergency meeting of the Coalition War Council brought together the greatest military minds from dozens of worlds. General Vorthak of the Krellin Empire studied star charts with his 6 eyes. Commander Silith from the Vexian Confederacy checked weapon inventories. They all knew what the return of the Devourers meant. The last time the Devourers had appeared 50 years ago, they had consumed 3 entire star systems before the Coalition could stop them. Billions had died. Entire species had been wiped from existence. The creatures seemed to exist only to destroy, moving from galaxy to galaxy, like a plague of metal and hunger. Our scouts report at least 200 Devourer ships moving toward the Kepler sector. Admiral Kexon announced. They will reach the mining station Alpha 7 in 6 days. General Vorthak's main eye focused on the Admiral. What defenses does Alpha 7 have? Minimal. It's mostly an automated facility with about 3,000 workers from various species. Admiral Kexon's voice was grim. If we're going to save them, we need to move fast. The Coalition's fastest ships launched within hours. Admiral Kexon led the fleet personally, bringing the most powerful weapons the galaxy had ever created. Energy cannons that could crack planets, missile systems that could destroy moons, shield generators that had never failed in battle. They arrived at Alpha 7 just as the Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace. The Devourers looked like someone had turned nightmares into spaceships. Their vessels were black and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange organic curves mixed with mechanical angles. They moved through space like hunting animals, smooth and deadly. All ships prepare for battle, Admiral Kexon commanded. Remember, these creatures adapt to our weapons. Change tactics frequently. The first exchange of fire lit up the space around Alpha 7 like a deadly fireworks show. Coalition energy beams struck Devourer ships and seemed to have no effect. The creatures' hulls absorbed the energy and grew stronger. Switch to kinetic weapons, Admiral Kexon ordered. Solid projectiles flew across space at incredible speeds. Some Devourer ships took damage, but others began to shift and change. Their hulls became harder, more resistant. Within minutes, the kinetic weapons also became useless. "They're adapting too fast," General Vorthak reported from his flagship. "Every time we hurt them, they learned to resist." The battle continued for hours. The Coalition forces tried every weapon, every tactic they knew. Each time, the Devourers learned and adapted. Worse, they began to fight back with weapons that seemed designed specifically to counter Coalition technology. When the Talarian flagship Pride of Nexus exploded in a ball of blue fire, Admiral Kexon knew they were losing. The Devourers had turned the Coalition's own strength against them. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions around Alpha 7, he ordered. "Prepare for evacuation of the mining station." That was when the small human ship appeared on the sensors. "Unidentified vessel, this is Coalition Fleet Command," Admiral Kexon transmitted. "You are entering a combat zone. Retreat immediately." The reply came in the calm voice that had become familiar to some Coalition officers. "Admiral, this is Commander Hagen Choi of the Human Expeditionary Force. We received word about the Devourer attack. We're here to help." Admiral Kexon almost laughed. A single human ship against a fleet of Devourers. It would be destroyed in seconds. "Commander, I appreciate the offer, but your vessel should return to safe space. These enemies are beyond your capabilities." "Understood, Admiral. But we'd like to try something if you don't mind." Before Admiral Kexon could respond, the human ship moved toward the Devourer fleet. It was small and simple, like all human vessels. No massive weapons. No glowing shields. It looked like it would break apart if someone sneezed on it. The Devourers noticed the approaching ship and turned several vessels to intercept it. Energy beams lashed out, the same weapons that had been destroying Coalition ships for hours. The human ship dodged, not with fancy energy shields or advanced armor. It simply moved out of the way. The Devourers fired again, trying to predict where the human ship would go. But it didn't go where they expected. It zigged when they thought it would zag. It spun when they thought it would climb. "What are they doing?" General Vorthak asked, watching the display in confusion. The human ship fired back with what looked like simple projectile weapons. Basic kinetic rounds that any species could manufacture. They struck a Devourer vessel and caused minor damage. The Devourer began to adapt, its hull shifting to become more resistant to kinetic impacts. Then the human ship switched to energy weapons. The Devourers, which had just finished adapting to kinetic rounds, were not ready for energy beams. The weapons caused significant damage before the creatures could adjust. But as soon as they began to adapt to energy weapons, the human ship switched back to kinetics. "They're confusing them," Dr. Minseo Park observed from the Coalition science vessel. She had been studying the battle with growing fascination. "The humans aren't trying to overpower the Devourers. They're making them adapt so quickly they can't keep up." The human ship continued its strange dance. Sometimes it used energy weapons, sometimes kinetics, sometimes it used weapons the Coalition didn't recognize at all. Each time the Devourers began to adapt, the humans changed to something else. More disturbing for the watching Coalition officers, the human ship began to predict what the Devourers would do. When a Devourer vessel moved to attack, the human ship was already somewhere else. When they tried to surround it, the humans slipped through gaps that hadn't existed moments before. "How are they doing that?" Admiral Kexon whispered. Commander Choi's voice came over the communication channel. "Admiral, we've analyzed their movement patterns. These creatures fight like they've encountered Talarian ships before. And Krellan ships? And Vexian ships. They know how all of you move." The implications hit Admiral Kexon like a physical blow. "They've fought us before?" "Not you specifically, sir. But they've fought ships that move like yours, ships that think like yours. They know your tactics because they've seen them 1,000 times on 1,000 different worlds." Dr. Park activated her transmitter. "Commander Choi, this is Dr. Park on the science vessel. How are you countering their adaptations?" "We're not countering them, Doctor. We're just not giving them anything consistent to adapt to. On our world, we learned that if you can't be stronger than your enemy, you can be more confusing." The human ship continued its impossible dance around the much larger Devourer vessels. Sometimes it fought like a Talarian ship, sometimes like a Krellan vessel. Sometimes it used tactics that no Coalition species had ever developed. The Devourers began to make mistakes. Ships collided with each other as they tried to predict human movements. Weapons fired at empty space where the human ship should have been but wasn't. Their perfect adaptation systems began to overload from trying to counter tactics that kept changing. One devourer ship, apparently damaged by the constant confusion, began to retreat. Then another. Within an hour, the entire devourer fleet was pulling back from the mining station. For the first time in recorded history, the devourers had withdrawn from a battle they were winning. The coalition fleet hung in space, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. A single human ship had driven off an enemy that their entire armada could not defeat. Commander Choi, Admiral Kexon transmitted, "Would you be willing to meet with our tactical staff?" "Of course, Admiral. But I should mention we weren't alone out there." "What do you mean?" 3 more human ships were positioned around the battle zone. "We work better as a team." Admiral Kexon checked his sensors again. He could see no other human vessels. Either they were hiding with technology beyond coalition understanding, or they had left the area so quietly that the best sensors in the galaxy had missed them. Both possibilities worried him greatly. Dr. Park made notes in her research files as she watched the human ship dock with the coalition flagship. The humans had not won through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had won by being unpredictable. In a galaxy where every species had spent thousands of years perfecting their way of war, the humans seemed to have perfected the art of not having a way of war. As she prepared to meet with the human crew, Dr. Park wondered if the coalition had just witnessed the most dangerous species in the galaxy, pretending to be harmless. The Coalition War Council chamber had never seen a meeting like this one. Representatives from every major military force in the galaxy sat around the curved table, all staring at the 3 humans who had been invited to explain their impossible victory. General Sun-Ho Lee sat calmly in the center chair, his hands folded in front of him. To his left, Commander Ye Ji-yoon studied the alien faces with quiet interest. On his right, tactical analyst Wanbin Seo took notes on a simple paper pad, ignoring the advanced recording devices the other species used. Admiral Kexon spoke first. "General Lee, we need to understand what happened at Alpha 7. Your single ship defeated an enemy that our entire fleet could not handle." "How?" General Lee smiled slightly. "Admiral, we didn't defeat them. We confused them." "There's a difference." "Explain," demanded General Vorthak. The Krellin's 6 eyes focused on Lee with uncomfortable intensity. "What tactics did you use? What weapons? What strategy?" "That's the problem with your question, General," Lee replied calmly. "We didn't use a strategy. We used many strategies. Sometimes we fought like you do. Sometimes we fought like the Talarians do. Sometimes we made up new ways to fight as we went along." Commander Silith of the Vexian Confederacy leaned forward. Her silver skin gleamed under the chamber lights. "You improvised during battle? That's madness. Military doctrine exists for a reason. Without proper planning, armies fail." Commander Yoon spoke for the first time. "Commander Silith, may I ask how long your people have been using the same military doctrine?" "The Vexian way of war has been perfected over 3,000 years," Silith replied proudly. "Every movement, every formation, every tactic has been tested and refined. We know exactly how to fight any enemy." "Including the Devourers?" Yoon asked quietly. The chamber fell silent. The Devourers had torn through Vexian forces like they weren't even there. "The Devourers are a special case," Silith said defensively. "They adapt to our methods." "They adapt to everyone's methods," Seo observed without looking up from his notes. "We've been reading your military histories. Every species in this room has a way of war that goes back thousands of years. You've all become very good at fighting the way you've always fought." General Vorthak's scales darkened with anger. "Are you saying our military traditions are worthless?" "Not worthless," General Lee said quickly. "Very effective, but also very predictable. The Devourers have fought species like yours before. Maybe not your exact species, but ones that think like you do. Ones that fight like you do." He stood and walked to the display screen. With simple gestures, he called up battle footage from Alpha 7. "Watch this part. When our ship first engages the Devourers, what do? The aliens watched as Devourer ships moved to surround the human vessel using a classic pincer formation. Standard encirclement, Admiral Kexon observed. Basic but effective. Yes, they use it because that's what works against most species. Your ships have limited maneuverability. They follow predictable flight patterns. The Devourers have learned to counter those patterns." Lee advanced the footage. Now watch what happens when we don't follow those patterns. The human ship twisted through space in ways that made no tactical sense. It dove when it should have climbed. It slowed when it should have accelerated. It fired at empty space, then suddenly spun to hit targets that had moved into that space. Chaos, General Vorthak muttered. Looks like chaos, Lee agreed. But it's controlled chaos. Every movement serves a purpose, even if that purpose changes from second to second. Commander Silith studied the display with growing confusion. How do you coordinate such movements? How do your crews know what to do without orders? Commander Yoon smiled. That's the other difference between us and you. Your crews follow orders. Our crews think. The statement caused an uproar among the alien officers. Captain Gyeong of the Talarian Defense Corps stood up angrily. Military discipline exists for a reason. Soldiers who think instead of obeying get people killed. Sometimes, Yoon agreed calmly. But soldiers who only obey orders can't adapt when those orders become wrong. And in battle, orders become wrong very quickly. Seo looked up from his notes. May I demonstrate something? General Vorthak, would you be willing to help with an experiment? The Krellin general looked suspicious but nodded. Excellent. I want you to point at me. Just extend one of your arms and point. Vorthak did so, his right arm extending toward the human. Now I'm going to try to avoid your pointing. Every time you point at me, I'll move somewhere else. Please try to predict where I'll go and point there instead. What followed was 3 minutes of the strangest demonstration the War Council had ever seen. Vorthak would point at a spot and Seo would move somewhere else. The general tried to predict the human's movements, pointing where he thought Seo would go next, but the tactical analyst never went where expected. This is ridiculous, Vorthak said finally. There's no pattern to follow. Exactly, Seo replied. Now imagine that instead of pointing, you're firing weapons. And instead of moving around a room, I'm flying a spaceship. How would you hit me? With area effect weapons. Destroy everything in a large zone. Good solution. But what if I have friends who might get hurt by area effect weapons? What if you can't afford to destroy everything around me? Vorthak sat down slowly, understanding beginning to show in his eyes. General Lee returned to the center of the room. Every species in the coalition has become very good at fighting other species that fight logically. You've all developed counter-tactics for each other's strategies. But what happens when you face someone who doesn't have a strategy? Anarchy, Admiral Kexon said. Military forces without strategy are mobs. Unless, Lee said quietly, every individual in that force is trained to think and adapt independently. Unless your entire military doctrine is based on change instead of consistency. Commander Yoon activated her own display. This is what human military training looks like. The screen showed human soldiers practicing dozens of different combat styles. In one scene, they fought like coalition Marines using standard formations and tactics. In another, they battled as individual warriors, each using different techniques. In a third, they seemed to be making up new fighting methods as they went along. We don't teach our people to fight one way, Yoon explained. We teach them to fight every way. And then we teach them to invent new ways when the old ones stop working. But how do you maintain unit cohesion? Captain Gyeong asked. How do you coordinate forces that are all doing different things? The same way a flock of birds coordinates, Seo answered. Simple rules that everyone follows, but individual freedom within those rules. Stay together, protect each other, accomplish the mission. Everything else can change. Admiral Kexon studied the humans with growing unease. What you're describing isn't military doctrine. It's something else entirely. Yes, General Lee agreed. We call it survival. On our world, the species that survived weren't the strongest or the smartest. They were the ones that could change the fastest when change was needed. The chamber fell quiet as the implications sank in. Every species in the coalition had achieved space travel by mastering their environment, by becoming perfectly adapted to their worlds and their ways of life. They had reached the stars by being extremely good at specific things. The humans seemed to have reached the stars by being mediocre at everything but excellent at becoming something else when needed. There's something else you should know, Yoon said softly. The Devourers aren't random destroyers. Dr. Park's research suggests they're more like gardeners. Gardeners? General Vorthak's voice was barely above a whisper. They remove species that have stopped growing, stopped changing. Species that have become so specialized, so perfect at their particular way of life that they can't adapt to new challenges. SEO closed his notebook and looked around the room. Every species they've destroyed had one thing in common. They had perfected their way of war and stopped looking for new ways to fight. The silence stretched on until Admiral Kexon finally spoke. Are you saying that our strength has become our weakness? We're saying that the galaxy might be more dangerous than you realized, General Lee replied. And that humans might be more useful allies than you thought. As the meeting ended and the various species representatives filed out, many were already thinking about the uncomfortable questions the humans had raised. Had their civilizations become too rigid? Too predictable? And if the humans were right about the Devourers being gardeners, what did that say about the rest of the galaxy? Captain Guyong stayed behind as the others left. General Lee, may I ask you something personal? Of course. How powerful are humans, really? What would happen if your people decided to conquer instead of help? Lee was quiet for a long moment. Captain, that's the question we hope we never have to answer. Because we're not sure we'd like what we learned about ourselves. Ambassador Taman had not slept well since the War Council meeting 3 weeks ago. The questions raised by the humans troubled him more each day. He found himself watching news reports differently, reading military analyses with new eyes, and wondering about things he had never questioned before. The latest reports from Human Coalition joint operations made his concerns worse. In the Vega sector, a combined fleet had destroyed a Devourer scouting force without losing a single ship. In the Centauri region, human advisors had helped local defense forces repel raiders using tactics nobody had seen before. Each success raised more questions about what humans were truly capable of. Today, those questions would finally be asked directly. Captain Ji-Ho Kim sat across from Taman in the ambassador's private office aboard the diplomatic station. Between them, the tea grew cold as both men considered their words carefully. Captain, Taman said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Kim nodded. I'll do my best, Ambassador. How powerful are humans, really? The question hung in the air between them. Kim was quiet for a long time, his expression thoughtful but troubled. We honestly don't know, Kim said at last. We've never needed to find out. The answer was somehow more frightening than any boast would have been. Taman felt his purple skin grow pale. What do you mean? Every conflict in human history has been about survival, not conquest, Kim explained. We've never fought a war to see how much damage we could do. We've only fought to make the fighting stop. Before Taman could respond, his aide Kylus entered the room with an urgent message. Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission. From the Human Archaeological Team in the Sol System. Dr. Donghyuk Nam says he has important findings about Earth's history. The transmission came through, clearly. Dr. Nam appeared on the screen, standing in what looked like an underground laboratory. Behind him, Taman could see artifacts and displays that seemed to span thousands of years of human development. Ambassador Taman. Captain Kim, Dr. Nam began. I've been studying human military history for the Coalition archives, and I've discovered something that might explain why humans are so different from other species. He gestured to a display showing human evolution over millions of years. Most species in the galaxy evolved as either predators or prey. They developed specific survival strategies and stuck with them. Humans evolved as something else entirely. The display changed to show early humans hunting enormous animals across vast distances. We were persistence hunters. We couldn't outrun our prey or overpower it directly. Instead, we chased it until it collapsed from exhaustion. We survived not by being stronger or faster, but by never giving up. Dr. Nam moved to another display showing early human settlements. When we developed agriculture and cities, we still faced constant challenges. Climate changes, diseases, natural disasters, invasions from other groups. The humans who survived weren't the ones who perfected one way of life. They were the ones who could change when change was necessary. Captain Kim leaned forward. Dr. Nam, what does this mean for our current situation? It means humans never conquered Earth, Dr. Nam replied. We just outlasted everything that tried to conquer us. Ice ages, volcanoes, plagues, each other. Every time our environment changed, we changed with it. Species that couldn't adapt went extinct. We adapted and survived. Taman studied the displays with growing understanding and fear. You're saying humans are evolved to be unpredictable? More than that, Dr. Nam said. We're evolved to be adaptable at a fundamental level. Most species develop one successful strategy and use it for millions of years. Humans develop thousands of strategies and keep developing new ones. The transmission ended. leaving Taemin and Captain Kim alone with the implications. Taemin's hands shook slightly as he poured fresh tea. "Captain, may I see a demonstration of human military capability? Not for the Coalition records, for my own understanding." Kim considered this carefully. "What kind of demonstration?" "The kind that would show me what would happen if humans decided they didn't want to be in the lowest tier of galactic civilization anymore." Captain Kim activated his communicator. "Admiral Shin, could you meet us in Conference Room 7? And bring some of your tactical staff, Admiral Beomgyu." Shin arrived 30 minutes later with Commander Tai-Hyung Park and Dr. Minji Kang. They seemed to understand immediately why they had been called. "Ambassador," Admiral Shin said quietly, "what you're asking to see isn't something we show lightly." "I understand, but I need to know what the Coalition is really dealing with." Dr. Kang activated a secure holographic display. "What I'm about to show you is a tactical simulation. It's based on real human capabilities, but it's only theoretical." The display showed the Coalition's main fleet in standard defensive formation around Nexus Prime, the galactic capital. Hundreds of the most powerful ships ever built, armed with weapons that could destroy planets. "Scenario 1, Dr. Kang said. "Humans decide to take control of the galactic government through military force." The simulation began. Human ships appeared on the edge of the system, greatly outnumbered by Coalition forces. But as the battle progressed, something strange happened. The human ships didn't fight like ships. Sometimes they moved like a single organism. Sometimes they scattered like leaves in the wind. Sometimes they fought like Coalition vessels, using familiar tactics that drew the defenders into predictable responses. Then they would suddenly switch to completely different methods. Energy weapons became kinetic projectiles. Formation flying became individual action. Coordinated attacks became random strikes that somehow all supported each other. "The Coalition forces can't adapt fast enough," Admiral Shin explained as the simulation showed Coalition ships struggling to respond to constantly changing threats. "Every time they adjust their tactics, we're already doing something else." The simulation ended with human forces in control of Nexus Prime without destroying a single major Coalition ship. They had simply made organized resistance impossible. "Scenario 2, Dr. Kang continued. "Humans decide to eliminate other species entirely." This simulation was darker. It showed human ships spreading across the galaxy but not conquering planets. Instead, they disrupted supply lines, communication networks, and trade routes. They made coordination between different species impossible. "We wouldn't destroy your worlds," Commander Park explained. "We'd make them irrelevant, cut off from each other, unable to support each other. Each species would eventually collapse on its own." The simulation showed Coalition civilization fragmenting as species became isolated and unable to maintain their advanced technology in complex societies. "How long would this take?" Taemin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Conservative estimate? 5 years, Admiral Shin replied. "Optimistic estimate? 18 months. Taemin set down his teacup with shaking hands. "And Scenario 3? "There is no Scenario 3, Captain Kim said firmly. "Because we would never choose either of those paths. But you needed to understand what you're really asking when you wonder about human power." Dr. Kang deactivated the display. "Ambassador, the truth is that humans could probably dominate this galaxy if we wanted to. But domination has never been our goal. We just want to survive and help others survive. But what if someone threatened Earth?" Taemin asked. "What if someone tried to hurt humanity?" The humans looked at each other with expressions that made Taemin's blood run cold. Finally, Captain Kim answered, "Ambassador, there's an old human saying, the most dangerous enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose. If someone threatened our home, our families, our species, we would become something the galaxy has never seen before. What would you become?" "Unassailable," Admiral Shin said quietly. "Not because we couldn't be hurt, but because hurting us would cost more than any enemy could afford to pay." As the meeting ended and the humans left, Taemin sat alone in his office staring out at the stars. The Coalition had welcomed humans as a weak prey species, suitable only for simple tasks and basic protection. They had been catastrophically wrong. The humans weren't weak. They weren't even strong in any way the galaxy understood. They were something far more dangerous. They were indefinable. Every time someone thought they understood human capabilities, humans became something else. Taemin made a note in his personal files to recommend immediate elevation of human status within the Coalition. Not because they had demanded it, but because keeping them in the lowest tier was the kind of short-sighted mistake that had probably doomed dozens of galactic civilizations throughout history. The humans had told him they just wanted to survive and help others survive. Taman believed them, but he also understood now that survival for humans might mean something very different than it meant for everyone else. The emergency klaxons echoed through every coalition ship as the largest Devourer fleet in recorded history emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus system. Long-range sensors counted over 800 vessels, each one larger and more dangerous than anything the Devourers had used before. Fleet Admiral Yunwu Kang stood on the bridge of the human vessel Persistence, watching the massive coalition armada deploy around Nexus Prime. 500 coalition ships representing every major species in the galaxy had gathered for this final battle. It was the largest military force in galactic history. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer Lieutenant Jamin O, "Coalition Command is requesting our fleet disposition." Admiral Kang looked around his small bridge crew. 23 human ships had answered the call to defend the galactic capital. By any reasonable measure, they were insignificant compared to the massive coalition fleet. "Tell them we're ready to assist as needed," Admiral Kang replied. "And Lieutenant? Activate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was something no coalition species had ever seen. As the human ships spread out around the battle zone, they seemed to dissolve into the background of space itself. Not invisible exactly, but somehow unimportant, forgettable, like ships that belonged so naturally in the area that sensors stopped tracking them as threats. Admiral Kexon's voice came over the communication channel from the Coalition flagship. "All ships, the Devourers are approaching attack range. Remember, they adapt to our weapons quickly. Change tactics every few minutes to prevent them from countering our efforts." The battle began exactly as every Devourer engagement had for the past 50 years. Coalition ships opened fire with their most powerful weapons. Energy beams that could boil oceans struck Devourer hulls and caused massive damage for about 30 seconds. Then the Devourer ships began to change. Their hulls shifted and adapted, becoming resistant to energy weapons. Coalition forces switched to kinetic projectiles, causing more damage until the Devourers adapted to those as well. "This is Admiral Kexon to all ships," came the increasingly desperate transmission. "They're adapting faster than before. Switch to quantum torpedoes." The new weapons worked briefly before they too became ineffective. The coalition forces had spent months developing new tactics and weapons specifically for this battle. But the Devourers countered each one within minutes. Worse, the Devourers were fighting back with weapons that seemed designed specifically to counter coalition technology. Talarian ships found their shields useless against precise energy beams that bypassed their defenses entirely. Krellan vessels discovered their armor meant nothing against projectiles that phased through matter. Phexian formations were broken apart by weapons that targeted their coordination systems. "They know us," General Vorthak transmitted from his flagship. "They know exactly how we fight, exactly how to counter everything we do." Admiral Kang watched the battle unfold with growing sadness. The coalition forces were brave and skilled, but they were fighting an enemy that had been designed to counter exactly their kind of bravery and skill. Every species was using their perfected military doctrines, the tactics they had refined over thousands of years. The Devourers had seen it all before. "Admiral," Lieutenant O reported, "coalition casualties are approaching 30%. Should we intervene?" "Not yet," Admiral Kang replied quietly. "Wait for the signal." The signal came when the coalition flagship Unity took critical damage and began to fall back. Admiral Kexon's voice, now strained with exhaustion and fear, filled the communication channels. "All ships, this is Coalition Command. We're being overwhelmed. Any vessels with unconventional weapons or tactics, please engage immediately. Repeat, we need any help we can get." Admiral Kang activated his ship's communication system. "This is Admiral Kang to all human vessels. Begin tactical jazz. Authorization Sigma 7 Alpha." What followed was unlike any battle the galaxy had ever witnessed. The human ships seemed to appear from nowhere, suddenly visible and active after being ignored for hours. But they didn't attack like ships. They didn't move in formations or follow standard tactical doctrine. Instead, they began to improvise. Commander Mikyung Seo's destroyer Adaptability engaged 3 Devourer cruisers by pretending to be a damaged coalition vessel requesting assistance. When the Devourers moved to finish off what they thought was easy prey, CO's ship suddenly revealed weapons that fired in directions the Devourers hadn't expected from angles that should have been impossible. Captain Hannel Park's frigate, Flexibility, began the battle fighting like a Talarian ship, using energy weapons and standard formations. When the Devourers adapted to counter Talarian tactics, Park's ship suddenly started fighting like a Krellin vessel. When they adapted to that, it began using Vexian techniques. When they adapted to those, it started using tactics that no species in the galaxy had ever developed. The Devourers' adaptation systems, perfected over millions of years of consuming galactic civilizations, began to struggle. They were designed to analyze enemy behavior, determine patterns, and develop counters. But human ships presented no consistent patterns to analyze. "What are they doing?" Admiral Kexon transmitted, watching in amazement as human ships seemed to change their fundamental nature from moment to moment. "Tactical jazz," Admiral Kang replied. "Every ship is improvising independently while maintaining overall coordination. No fixed plans, no predetermined tactics. Pure adaptation in real time." Lieutenant Commander Seola Kim's Corvette innovation demonstrated the concept perfectly. Her ship engaged a massive Devourer battleship by first attacking like a coalition heavy cruiser, forcing the enemy to strengthen its defenses against large weapons. Then it suddenly switched to fighting like a small fighter, using speed and agility the Devourer defenses couldn't track. When the battleship adapted to counter small fast targets, Kim's ship began fighting like a long-range support vessel, striking from distances the Devourer couldn't reach. But the most disturbing thing for the watching coalition forces was how human ships began to predict Devourer movements. Every time a Devourer vessel moved to adapt to human tactics, the humans seemed to already know what that adaptation would be, and had prepared countermeasures. "They're reading them," Dr. Minseo Park observed from the coalition science vessel. "The humans are predicting how the Devourers will adapt." "How is that possible?" Admiral Kexon asked. Captain Jiho Kim's voice came over the communication channel from the human command ship. "Admiral, we've been studying Devourer adaptation patterns for months. They're actually very predictable. They always adapt in the most efficient way possible. Once you understand their efficiency algorithms, you can predict their changes. But that's impossible. Adaptation should be random. Not if your machine's designed to be efficient. The Devourers aren't really alive, Admiral. They're automated systems designed to eliminate civilizations that have stopped evolving. They adapt efficiently, but they can't truly innovate." The battle continued for 6 more hours, but the outcome became clear within the first 30 minutes. The Devourers, faced with enemies they couldn't predict or counter, began to make increasingly desperate mistakes. Ships collided with each other as they tried to adapt to human tactics that had already changed again. Weapons fired at empty space where human ships should have been but weren't. Most remarkably, the Devourers began to retreat. For the second time in their recorded history, they withdrew from a battle. But Admiral Kang wasn't finished. "Open a channel to the Devourer fleet," he ordered. "Sir?" Lieutenant O looked confused. "They don't communicate with other species. They do today. Broad-spectrum transmission. All frequencies." The transmission went out to the withdrawing Devourer fleet. When Admiral Kang spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "Devourer fleet, this is Admiral Kang of the Human Coalition Forces. We know what you are. We know why you exist. You're not destroyers. You're gardeners. You eliminate civilizations that have stopped growing. The Devourer fleet slowed its retreat. We also know that you've never encountered a species like humans before. We don't stop growing. We don't perfect our methods and stick with them. We change constantly, adapt continuously, evolve with every challenge." For the first time in galactic history, the Devourers transmitted a response. It was not in any known language, but human computers translated it quickly. "What do you want, Anomaly? We want to offer you something no species has ever offered before. Instead of consuming civilizations that have stopped evolving, why not teach them to evolve again? Help us show the galaxy how to grow instead of just destroying those who have forgotten how." The silence from the Devourer fleet lasted for several minutes. Coalition forces watched in amazement as the most feared enemy in galactic history seemed to consider a human proposal. The response, when it came, changed everything. "Proposal acceptable, we will observe, learn from the anomaly species. If other species can be taught to change as you change, consumption will become unnecessary." Admiral Kang smiled as he watched the Devourer fleet assume a position at the edge of the system, waiting and watching rather than attacking and consuming. Admiral Kekson, he transmitted to the Coalition flagship, "I think it's time for the galaxy to learn some new ways of doing things." As the immediate crisis ended and ships began returning to their bases,